My name's Natasha. I grew up in a small town of Dillsboro, Indiana. My parents, unfortunately, were both drug addicts. I've got 6 siblings. Um, and at first, it wasn't like that. My dad had a railroad job and he got hurt on the railroad, and so he started taking pain pills after that. And both my parents quickly became addicted. And as that progressed, my father became more and more abusive. It all escalated one night until the cops came after a very bad physical altercation between my parents and arrested my dad. After my dad was arrested, my mom just kind of took off. She left my 16-year-old sister to do her best to raise the rest of us. She was the oldest. After that, she ended up getting engaged to a man that was sexually abusive towards me and my younger siblings. I was 9 at the time, and I believe they were 2, 3, and 7. But after that, my dad's side of the family stepped in. He got out of jail and he went to live with my grandma on his side. We did not go live with my dad. We went to live with our aunt on his side. At that time, things were going okay. We really missed our mom, but we kind of had a normal home for once. Unfortunately, about a year after I moved in with my aunt, my dad died of a heroin overdose. And then things just kind of, things dramatically changed after that. My aunt was once kind and attentive, and she just kind of changed. She became very abusive towards me and my sister. It got to the point that she would lock us in a room and throw in a bologna sandwich once a week. Thankfully, the state stepped in and we were put into foster care. And I spent my whole high school years with this wonderful woman who still is part of my life. She ran a rescue farm for kids and animals. And she's just probably the biggest blessing, that could have ever happened. I was a really good kid in high school. I did sports, I did marching band, I got straight A's. I got a full ride scholarship to study biomedical sciences at Morehead State University. But my first year of college, I went home to stay with my biological mother for Christmas break. And I quickly was introduced to marijuana, and my brother back home had his best friend was kind of a drug dealer. I didn't even know what a drug dealer was like back then. So I thought he was just this cute boy that, got me a little bit of weed. Well, when I went back to school after Christmas break that year, he wanted me to come spend every weekend with him. And so I started to do that. And unfortunately, I got pregnant my freshman year of college. So my sophomore year, I didn't go back. I tried to go to school online, but it was just unmanageable as I was living with this guy and his grandma, and he sold drugs, and it just wasn't a really good environment to try and do school in. I didn't smoke weed or cigarettes or drink or anything during my first pregnancy. I stopped during that, but after my daughter was born, I quickly went back to smoking marijuana. After my daughter was born, my kid's dad kind of did a 180 on me. He turned out to be pretty abusive. I can't tell you how many times he's held a gun to my head. He shot at me. He strangled me till I was unconscious. It just wasn't a good environment to have my daughter in. So we were on again, off again. I just couldn't seem to get away from him for a long time. And we ended up having another kid, a son, who is really my little miracle baby. Back then, God was giving me a lot of prevenient grace. My son I was told late in my pregnancy that he had swollen ventricles in his brain and that he'd probably be born paralyzed. But by the grace of God, he came out perfectly normal and those ventricles healed themselves. As my kids got older and they came to be toddlers, I was smoking a lot of marijuana. I always worked. I always had an apartment. Sometimes their dad would be in my life and sometimes he wouldn't. But after, I want to say, so in about the beginning of 2019 was the last time that I was with him. And when we broke up, I started hanging out with one of his friends that could get me marijuana. And I was doing Xanax here and there. And I ended up getting into a really bad car accident. I had a seizure at the wheel while marijuana was in my system. And I actually broke my hip, my ankle, my femur in both legs, my tibia and my fibia in both legs. And now I have metal bars from my hips to my ankles in both my legs. But the worst of it was that my son was with me. We were on our way to get my daughter from preschool, and he ended up internally decapitated. I woke up in the ICU with my mom standing by my bed telling me that they didn't know if he was going to make it through the night. That was probably the worst moment of my entire life. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, that would have been a turning point. That was probably the first time I reached out to God, really, because as I was, starting to pass out and I could feel myself going into a seizure at the wheel, I just prayed one prayer, and it was, please, God, a 2-word prayer. And he really came through, even though I wasn't living my life right. I relearned to walk, and my son is just like every normal little boy. He just has a tiny scar on the back of his neck. He's completely normal. He had to do physical therapy and had surgeries, but he's perfectly fine now. Unfortunately for me, that's kind of where things took a turn for the worse. The state stepped in to take custody of my kids because I had marijuana in my system at the time. Thank God my parents stepped in and took my kids. So I didn't have to really worry that they were with people that I didn't know. But instead of, really taking the time to get better and get my kids back, I just didn't know how to deal with that. So I started doing riskier and riskier things. I started selling drugs. I was always constantly smoking weed. I just didn't know what else to do. And eventually, they couldn't keep my case open any longer. So my parents got temporary guardianship of my kids, and they have guardianship of my kids. It's been probably, I don't know, like 5 years, and I still don't have them back. This, I could spend all day, going over the horrors I lived as a drug addict, and the horrible things that I've done, the horrible things that I've seen. But really, I think people, can kind of come to those conclusions themselves. So where things started to look up for me was this past August. I went to a rehab center in Cambridge City, and it really didn't do much for me. I immediately started smoking weed again when I left there. But I just still felt really empty inside, and I couldn't figure out, with or without the drugs, I felt miserable. So I had heard about Crossroads a long time ago, and I had always thought, no way do I want to do rehab for 4 months. But I decided to give it a try because I really just didn't know what else to do. And I really thought when I came to Crossroad, I knew it was a Christian recovery center, but I was like, that's cool. I mean, we'll do the 12 steps and go to church on Sundays. Well, it's like really intensely a Christian recovery center. And at first, I really just was overwhelmed by that. And I've been here for about 3 months. And just a couple weeks ago, I really had a strong Jesus encounter. I mean, it felt like a bolt of lightning came down from heaven and just hit me in the heart. I've been praying for a heart change for years. I've been praying for the Lord to take the taste of drugs and alcohol out of my mouth for years. And I've been praying that He would renew my mind and restore my family for years. So there was a long time where I thought, maybe even if I believed in God, that maybe He stopped believing in me. But, it's crazy because it's like once I had that aha moment, everything else has started falling into place. Both my mom and my grandma have told me that just in the change of the sound of my voice, they can tell that this time is different. And this time really feels different. I really thought all those people that said that the difference in their recovery with God, were nuts. I really thought there's no way. And I've tried psychiatry, I've tried therapy, I've tried moving, I've tried everything. I mean, but I don't know, just since God has become a big part of my life, I just don't have fear anymore. I don't have anxiety. I'm not convinced that there's nothing good that's going to come of my life anymore. I think the most amazing thing that Crossroad has done for me is that I've gotten my hope back. And I haven't had that for a very long time. I don't know. I can't thank them enough. My only regret is that I didn't come sooner. And so I don't really have an end to my story, but I know that I now have a new beginning. So I'm really excited for that.